Solomon is among the most emblematic kings in history, one of the most prosperous rulers of all time, and one of the richest men the world has ever seen. In the Bible, he is highlighted not only for succeeding his father, King David, on the throne of Israel, but also for his uncommon wisdom and extraordinary works, the most notable of which was the first temple in Jerusalem. For you to have an idea, although Solomon is not mentioned in the biblical text until the final days of David are recorded, his name appears around 300 times in the Old Testament alone and at least 12 times in the New Testament. However, Solomon's name is also cited in other non-biblical writings and involved in Jewish legends that even relate him to a series of mystical and even obscure practices, such as supposed control over demons. But in this video, you will learn the true story of Solomon according to the Bible. King Solomon was the son of David and Bathsheba, who had been the wife of Uriah. Therefore, Solomon was born when David was already reigning from Jerusalem. He is also called by the name Jedediah in the Bible, which means beloved by the Lord. King Solomon ruled over Israel for about 40 years, approximately between 971 and 931 BC. There is virtually no information about the early years and youth of Solomon, but considering the biblical accounts of David's family life, we can establish a parameter about the type of environment in which Solomon grew up. We know that David had several wives, which obviously resulted in many problems among his wives and their children, who engaged in various intrigues, usually seeking prestige and power. Solomon himself appears in the biblical narrative in a context of great tension within the royal family amid a struggle for the throne of Israel, as King David was old and weakened. Before that, Absalom, Solomon's half-brother, had already tried to usurp the throne from their father but failed. However, later on, David's eldest surviving son, Adonijah, tried to repeat Absalom's move, proclaiming himself king over Israel. Adonijah even secured the support of Joab, David's former general, and Abiathar the priest, and tried in every way to take the throne from his father, even holding a coronation celebration. When they learned of Adonijah's plan, Bathsheba, the prophet Nathan, the priest Zadok, and other allies worked to remind David of the unfulfilled promise regarding Solomon being his successor. Thus, David ordered Solomon's ascension to the throne, and he was crowned king of Israel, anointed by Zadok. Solomon was probably not more than 18 years old when he was crowned. Solomon's reign was long, spanning for decades, but scholars debate whether his reign occurred approximately between 971 and 931 BC or between 960 and 920 BC, with the former being more likely. Shortly after David's death, King Solomon followed his father's instructions and acted accordingly to solidify his position as king and dismantle any opposition. He ordered the deaths of Adonijah and Joab, exiled Abiathar, and then reigned without internal opposition. King Solomon inherited from David an extensive territory of approximately 128,000 square kilometers. During his reign, Solomon greatly improved Israel's domestic conditions, replacing the old tribal divisions with a division of the territory into 12 administrative districts, each with an officer commissioned by the king. These districts were responsible for providing sustenance to the court throughout the year, with each district supplying for 1 month. The daily supply list was quite burdensome. According to the record in 1 Kings chapter 4, it included 9,000 kilograms of flour, 30 oxen, and numerous sheep and goats, besides game animals like deer, gazelles, roebucks, and choice fowl, served as delicacies at the table. Many people think this quantity is exaggerated, but they forget that these supplies were meant for the entire court of Israel at its peak, probably including all officials, officers, and Solomon's extended family. Many scholars believe this amount likely fed over 12,000 people daily. Solomon's court was very complete and organized, and his government aides were called princes. Militarily, King Solomon also made significant improvements. He introduced war chariots and cavalry into his army, provided new roads, and established frontier fortresses to protect trade routes. Speaking of commerce, commercial activity was a strong point of Solomon's reign. He controlled trade routes and organized strategic points of operation, generating substantial revenue. Silver became as common in his kingdom as stones, and cedar wood was abundant, allowing him to live amid unprecedented splendor in Israel. Moreover, he was a great diplomat, and during his reign, Israel rarely had to worry about any foreign military threat. Solomon's first significant trade agreement was with Hiram, king of Tyre, where he paid annually the equivalent of 2,000 tons of wheat and 400,000 liters of pure olive oil in exchange for wood for his constructions. Solomon also made a contract with Egyptian merchants for horse and chariot trade, which he then exported to the Hittites and Syrians for a good profit. The most lucrative commercial activity for King Solomon was his maritime trade, where his ships sailed the Red Sea and Arabian Sea, reaching Ophir. These voyages could last up to 3 years. Considering the annual revenue from his commercial strategies, tolls from merchandise traffic, and taxes paid by the population throughout his controlled territory, the wealth estimate reaches an exceptional level, placing King Solomon as one of the richest men in history. Among all the constructions during King Solomon's reign, the temple in Jerusalem was certainly the most important. According to God's promise, Solomon executed his father's project to build a temple to house the Ark of the Covenant. To obtain the necessary workforce, King Solomon resorted to forced labor, especially from subjugated Canaanite peoples. However, the number of Canaanite workers was insufficient for his plans, so he also recruited Israelites for this forced labor, a measure that was highly unpopular, evidenced by the episode of Adoniram's death, the superintendent of labor groups. The temple Solomon built was located on Mount Moriah, where David had built an altar to the Lord and, before that, probably where Abraham had taken Isaac to sacrifice him. Although David collected materials for the temple's construction, it was only in Solomon's 4th year of reign that it began. Despite seeming modest by today's standards, the temple building represented a significant enterprise for the time, built with the most valuable materials, including tons of gold and noble woods. When he completed the temple's construction in the 11th year of his reign, King Solomon planned a grand celebration with many sacrifices offered for the building's dedication. Among other buildings constructed by King Solomon in Israel, we can highlight the House of the Forest of Lebanon, measuring 50 meters long, 25 meters wide, and 15 meters high, a columned portico measuring 25 by 15 meters, a hall for his throne where he held judgments, a house for the daughter of the Pharaoh of Egypt, one of his wives, an impressively imposing location, and Solomon's residence itself, a considerable construction where he accommodated 700 wives and 300 concubines, along with the necessary servants. Solomon also built the Millo, a large fortress to protect the temple. As we know, besides wealth, King Solomon was known for his wisdom. The Bible records a dream in which the Lord appeared to him, asking what he most desired to receive. Solomon could have asked for riches, longevity, or honor, but the young king asked for wisdom, a discerning heart to govern his people wisely. One of the biblical episodes highlighting Solomon's wisdom is when 2 mothers came before him disputing a single newborn. The case was challenging, with no witnesses, but with great wisdom, King Solomon proposed that the baby be divided into 2 parts to solve the problem. Faced with the possibility of her son's death, the real mother preferred to give the baby to the other woman, prompting Solomon to judge the case impeccably. Solomon's wisdom is also evident in the literature he produced, composing thousands of proverbs and songs. The depth of his proverbs is impressive, with the Bible noting that he spoke about trees, animals, birds, reptiles, and fish. Many legends and ancient documents refer to Solomon's spectacular wisdom. The books of the Bible attribute a significant part of the Book of Proverbs to Solomon, as well as Ecclesiastes, possibly the Song of Solomon, and at least Psalms 72 and 127. The Bible also says that Solomon's wisdom was so impressive that people from all nations and kings of the earth came to hear it. One such visit was from the Queen of Sheba, who came from afar to listen to Solomon's wisdom. She posed many questions and riddles to Solomon, who answered them intelligently, leaving her completely impressed. The Queen of Sheba gifted Solomon many presents, including over 4 tons of gold. Despite all his wisdom, King Solomon made decisions that brought him significant problems. For example, Solomon subjected the people to forced labor, and his international commercial practices introduced idolatry into Israel through contact with other nations. He imposed heavy taxes that burdened the Israelites, and his intense polygamy was the main way false gods began to be recognized in Hebrew territory. Even Solomon himself was influenced by his many foreign wives and, in his old age, practiced mixed worship following other gods. Solomon's marital life seemed to be part of his political maneuvers, using marriages to secure advantageous international agreements. The biblical text also records that Solomon loved his wives, indicating that his relationships were not solely for strategic advantages. Solomon reached an impressive number of 700 wives and 300 concubines, being the Israelite ruler who most disregarded the biblical ordinance that a king should not multiply wives for himself. He married women from nations God had prohibited for the Hebrews, leading to the mixture of their religion with the faith of Israel. To please his wives, Solomon allowed them to worship their gods and even built temples for them. As a result, he strayed from his ancestors' faith, despite warnings from God. This led to divine punishment, and after Solomon's death, his kingdom was divided. God did not take the kingdom from Solomon during his lifetime due to his promise to David, but his successor, Rehoboam, faced the consequences of Solomon's errors, with the nation suffering an almost total loss of prosperity. The biblical narrative of Solomon's life ends with a judgment of his conduct. Despite his wisdom, his sins led to the disintegration of his kingdom. Solomon died at about 60 years old, and the Bible does not record the circumstances of his death. The king was buried in the city of David, and his son Rehoboam succeeded him on the throne. Solomon was a remarkable character, possessing wisdom and wealth unmatched by many, yet his later years' decisions brought ruin to the nation he so brilliantly led. The greatness and decline of Solomon offer many lessons and reflections for each one of us. Let me know if you need any further assistance.